Peace be unto you, beloved, not the peace of circumstances, but the peace of the one presence in whom all is well, all is whole, and all is God. The world may have woven stories of guilt, of punishment, of a God who demands payment before he offers love, but none of this touches the reality of your being. For you see, the infinite never created a sinner. The infinite expresses itself only in its own image, and that image is the Christ, the true identity of every individual. What we have carried as sin is not a condition, but a misunderstanding, a shadow arising from the belief that we exist apart from the source of our life. And the moment that belief enters, the moment we imagine ourselves cut off from God, we begin the weary journey of trying to become worthy of what has always been ours. But we are not here to polish the mask of a human personality. We are not here to struggle and strive to become good, to improve the false sense of self that the world has imposed upon us. We are here for a far greater revelation, to lay aside that mask entirely and behold the spiritual being that has never been less than whole, never less than pure, never less than the very expression of divine life. So let us open this hour with a quiet willingness to let go of the old concepts of guilt, of unworthiness, of a self that must be saved. Let us be willing to hear, perhaps for the first time, the whisper of truth that says, before the world judged you, I knew you. Before the world named you, I loved you. Before the world condemned you, I expressed myself as you. This is the beginning of our journey. Not the reforming of a sinner, but the revealing of God's own child. Now let us go deeper. For if we are to be free of the belief in sin, we must understand how it arose in the first place. And the answer, my friends, is not in some ancient moral failure, nor in the missteps of a mythical ancestor. No, the sense of sin has a much simpler origin. It was born the moment we accepted the illusion of separation from God. The instant we imagined ourselves to be a life apart, a selfhood, living independently, acting independently, thinking independently, that very instant the shadow called sin appeared. Not a real condition, but a shadow. Not a being, but a belief. For if you believe yourself separate from the infinite, then you must also believe yourself weak, limited, vulnerable, tempted, and guilty. You must believe that you, by your own human effort, must climb back to God, and so begins the tragedy of the ages. The soul trying to save itself, the branch trying to exist apart from the vine. But hear me, there is no separation. There never was. The separation exists only as a mental picture, a concept accepted by the human mind. The human mind looks out upon the world and sees a personal self born in time, shaped by circumstance, tossed by the winds of emotion and desire. And then it looks at God and sees a distant being in a far-off place, and it concludes, I must return to him. That, my friends, is the beginning of all suffering. Joe often said that the entire drama of human existence rests upon one mistaken identity. When you take yourself to be the human person, you must take upon yourself all the burdens of that person, its fears, its appetites, its memories, its mistakes, and then you call those burdens sin. Yet none of this touches the real you, because the real you was never born into the problem. The real you has always been the expression of the one life, moving as individual being. Look gently at this. If God is your life, how could your life be sinful? If God is your essence, how could your essence be corrupted? If God is your mind, how could your mind be darkened? Do you see what happens? The moment you accept God as the substance of your being, the entire belief in sin collapses like a shadow that never had form. This is why, throughout the ages, the great mystics have whispered, Awake, thou that sleepest. They are not telling a sinner to repent. They are telling the sleeping Christ to remember itself. They are speaking to the divine identity hidden beneath the world's labels, urging it to rise, to recognize its own nature, to throw off the garments of dust and step into the radiance that has always been its birthright. Therefore, let us understand, sin is not a blot upon your soul. Sin is not a condition in your being. Sin is the dream that you are something other than the spiritual offspring of God. And when that dream dissolves, the sinner dissolves with it, not reformed, not improved, but recognized as never having existed except as a belief held in ignorance of one's true identity. This is the beginning of freedom. And now, having seen that the sense of sin arises from a mistaken identity, we turn to the heart of our spiritual work, the recognition of our true identity. My beloved friends, if you would pause for a single quiet moment and listen not with the ears, but with that inner faculty of awareness, you would feel a gentle whisper telling you, you are more than you appear to be. There is within you a presence, a life, a wisdom that does not originate in the human mind or the human body. This presence is the Christ, the living expression of God as individual being. When Scripture says, I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me, it is not speaking of a saint or a prophet. It is speaking of the true nature of every man, woman, and child. But because the world interprets Christ as a historical figure, we have come to believe that the Christ is something outside ourselves, something to be worshipped from afar. This, too, is part of the illusion. The Christ is not a person. The Christ is not limited to Jesus of Nazareth. The Christ is the activity of God expressing itself as your very life. Consider this for a moment. The breath that moves your lungs, the intelligence that animates your thoughts, the love that rises spontaneously within your heart, these are not personal possessions. They are the movement of divine life itself. The Christ is not in you as something added. The Christ is you as God appearing in individualized form. And yet, because we have identified ourselves as the human personality with its fears, its memories, its desires, we have looked away from this inner light and called ourselves sinners. We have believed the outer costume and ignored the radiant being wearing it. But the infinite way teaches us gently, lovingly, that your true identity was never touched by the dream of separation. You may ask, if this is so, why do I not feel holy? Why do I not live as the Christ? And I say to you, because you have believed the world's testimony instead of the truth of your being. The world sees only surfaces. It sees the mask, the habits, the history, and it says, this is you. But God sees only His own self, shining. When the prodigal son wandered into a far country, did he change his identity? No. He only forgot it. And when he returned, the father did not say, now that you have repented, I will make you my son again. No. He said, this my son was dead and is alive again, meaning he had awakened from the illusion, not that he had earned a place he had lost. All spiritual awakening is the same. It is the remembrance of what you are, not the attainment of something you are not. To behold the Christ within you is to look past the garments of the flesh and see the invisible light that animates you. It is to realize that your true nature is not the anxious mind, not the aging body, not the troubled emotions. Your true nature is the invisible presence that witnesses these things without ever being one of them. This is why Joel insisted, again and again, that spiritual unfoldment comes not through thinking, not through self-improvement, but through awareness, through the recognition that I and the Father are one, and that this oneness is the eternal fact of your being. Sit with this a moment. You are not becoming the Christ. You are not reaching for the Christ. You are the Christ awakening to itself. And the more you rest in this realization, the more the burdens of the personal self begin to dissolve its guilt, its fear, its unworthiness. For these were never yours. They belonged only to the false sense of self you no longer need to maintain. You have never been the sinner. You have always been the expression of God. And now, my friends, having touched the radiant truth of your divine identity, let us dispel one more great misunderstanding that has burdened the human heart for generations. The world has taught us that goodness is something we achieve by effort, that if we discipline ourselves enough, struggle hard enough, strive long enough, we may become worthy of God's love. But I must tell you gently, compassionately, moral effort can never save you, not because morality is wrong, but because morality is effect, not cause. You see, the human mind believes that if it performs enough good deeds, cleans up enough faults, suppresses enough impulses, God will at last look upon it with approval. But this is to begin at the wrong end of the ladder. This is to imagine that the human self-separate, struggling, limited, can climb its way into heaven by personal effort. And yet Jesus himself said, I can of mine own self do nothing. He did not say this in humility. He said it in truth. No human self becomes spiritual. No human self attains enlightenment. No human self purifies itself into holiness. All such attempts are like trying to polish a shadow. You may work at it all day, but nothing has changed in substance, because the shadow never had existence to begin with. And so Joel would say to us, stop trying to reform the human self, for every attempt to make the human self good only strengthens the belief that there is a human self apart from God. And the moment you believe in a self apart from God, you have stepped back into the illusion of separation, and with separation comes fear, guilt, struggle, and the endless pursuit of worthiness. But hear this, grace makes you good. Grace alone. Not because grace rewards effort, but because grace is your own true nature, the divine activity of God expressing itself as you. When you rest in the awareness of your oneness with the infinite, goodness flows naturally, spontaneously, effortlessly, just as the fragrance flows from a flower without striving. You have noticed, perhaps, that when you are at peace, when you are centered in the presence, you do not have to force yourself to be kind. Love arises of its own accord. Forgiveness comes without effort. Wisdom appears without calculation. This is grace, God being God through you. And it is in this sense that the sinner vanishes not through self-correction, but through self-forgetting. When you stop identifying with the personal sense of I and begin to feel the living Christ revealing itself within you, then all the qualities you once tried to cultivate by human will emerge quietly, gently, as the natural expression of your true being. This is why Joel insisted that spiritual work is never the work of changing the outer life. It is the inner recognition of truth. When this recognition dawns, the outer life conforms without struggle, because forms always follow consciousness. So let us put aside the exhausting belief that we must earn God's love. Let us cease trying to make ourselves spiritual through discipline and effort, and let us rest instead in the great liberating truth. You are already what you are trying to become. You are already the expression of God's own goodness. You are already the place where grace flows into visibility. When you realize this, you no longer attempt to become better. You simply allow the infinite to reveal its own perfection as your life. And now, as we move more deeply into this sacred work, let us understand something of vital importance. The so-called sinner disappears not by being improved, not by being punished, not by being disciplined, but by being seen through. The sinner is not a condition to be healed, it is an appearance to be understood. And the moment it is understood, the moment its nature is revealed as illusion, it dissolves of its own nothingness. Just as a disease is not a reality in God, but a false belief held in human consciousness, so sin is nothing more than the belief in a selfhood apart from God. And when that belief is exposed, when the light of spiritual awareness shines upon it, the entire structure collapses like a shadow that vanishes the instant you turn toward the light. This is why attempts to change outer conduct never touch the root. You may prune the branches of a tree again and again, but unless the root is transformed, the fruit remains the same. So long as you believe, even unconsciously, that you are a separate self acting in a world of separate powers, you must experience the effects of that belief, and the effects appear as fear, guilt, compulsion, conflict, what the world calls sin. But hear me well, these appearances are not you. They never were you. They are the shadows cast by a false sense of identity. When you look at yourself, do not look at the outer picture. Do not look at the mistakes you have made, the habits you have succumbed to, the feelings you have felt. These belong to the dream state of the human mind, and the human mind is not the mind that was in Christ Jesus. You are not called to heal the dream, you are called to awaken from it. Let us take a simple example. A man stands in a dimly lit room and sees what appears to be a snake coiled in the corner. He trembles, he recoils, he cries out in fear. But when the light is turned on, the snake is revealed to be nothing more than a rope. Now tell me, did he conquer the snake? Did he fight it? Did he pray it away? No. He saw through the appearance, and the appearance vanished. This is precisely how we approach sin in the infinite way. We do not treat it, we do not battle it, we do not attempt to overcome it. We look at it with the inner eye and recognize this has no reality in God, therefore it has no reality in me. And in that very recognition, the false sense dissolves. Joel would remind us often that the greatest healing is the healing of identity. The moment you see yourself as the spiritual idea of God, the belief in sin can no longer attach itself to you. It has no ground on which to stand. You cannot be tempted by what you see to be unreal. You cannot be bound by what you recognize as a dream image. And you cannot condemn yourself for what never touched your true being. This is true forgiveness, not an act of personal will, but the clear spiritual perception that nothing real has been harmed, nothing divine has been stained. When Jesus said to the adulterous woman, "Neither do I condemn thee," he was not excusing sin. He was seeing through it. He was beholding the Christ where the world saw a sinner. So let us practice this vision now. Whenever a memory, a mistake, a feeling of unworthiness rises before you, pause for a moment, become still, and gently say within yourself, "This is not I. This is the shadow of a false belief. I remain the pure expression of God." Do not wrestle with the appearance. Do not try to change it. Simply turn toward the light of truth, and you will find that the darkness cannot remain. My friends, this is the dissolution of the sinner concept, not the reformation of the human self, but the revelation of the divine self that has never, for a single instant, departed from its source. And now, having seen through the appearance of the sinner and having recognized the Christ as the true identity of your being, we come to something wonderfully practical. For you may ask, if this is so, if I am truly God's own expression, should not my outer life reflect this? And the answer is yes, but not through effort, not through will, not through attempting to mold the outer picture to match the inner truth. No, the outer life is transformed as a consequence of consciousness never as the result of manipulation. You see, once you begin to live as God's child, not as a frail human seeking divine favor, but as the very presence of God individualized, something quiet and miraculous begins to happen. Problems lose their sting. Fears lose their authority. The circumstances that once threatened to overwhelm you begin to reveal themselves as nothing more than shifting shadows on the screen of appearance. For the Christ within you is the light, and when the light touches the world, the shadows naturally recede. Joel would often say, do not try to improve the effect. Change the consciousness that produces it. And this is the essence of spiritual living. When you abide in the awareness that your life is God's life, your supply is God's supply, your mind is God's mind, then the outer expressions begin to harmonize, not because you have fixed them, but because you have ceased to believe that they have any power apart from the one power. Look at how this takes place. When you live as God's child, your fears begin to dissolve, not because you have conquered them, but because you have discovered they never had power. They were the product of a belief in two powers, good and evil, spirit and matter, God and something other than God. And when the realization dawns that God is one, that God is the only presence and the only power, fear has nothing left to cling to. When you live as God's child, your sense of lack begins to fade away, not because you have attracted abundance through mental effort, but because you understand that all supply flows from consciousness. You cease looking to the world as your source. You stop depending on people, conditions, events, and begin to rest in the truth that the infinite expresses itself through you as all that is necessary for your fulfillment. When you live as God's child, your relationships begin to heal. Not because you have mastered techniques of communication or persuasion, but because you are no longer meeting people as separate individuals with separate minds and separate wills. You meet them as the same Christ that lives as you. You behold the divine identity in them, and that recognition becomes the healing influence. For in the presence of truth, conflict has no life. And when you live as God's child, even the body responds, not because you have attempted to improve it, but because you no longer identify with it as yourself. The body becomes an instrument, an expression, a temple through which the divine life moves. And as consciousness becomes purified of fear, guilt, and separation, the body reflects this harmony. But the real transformation, the real transformation is inward. It is the quiet sense that you are no longer living life. Life is living you. You are no longer trying to guide your path. The infinite is guiding it. You are no longer striving to be good. Goodness flows naturally as the activity of grace. You are no longer clinging to outcomes. You are resting in the fact that the Father within knows your needs even before you speak. This is the life of spiritual consciousness. This is the life of one who knows their identity as God's child. You see, the outer world may continue its noise, its threats, its upheavals, its economic anxieties, its personal dramas, but the one who knows their true identity stands in the midst of these appearances untouched, not by resistance, but by recognition. Just as the master slept peacefully in the boat while the storm raged, so you too discover that the storm cannot enter the place of your peace. For the Christ within you is the rock, and that rock is not moved. So, my friends, when you think of transformation, think not of effort, not of achievement, not of trying to become something. Think instead of awakening to the truth that has always been, that has never left you, that has never been absent for a single moment. You are God's child. You always have been. And as this consciousness becomes established within you, you will find that life begins to unfold from within gently, effortlessly, beautifully, because the Christ now lives your life, and where the Christ is recognized, harmony must appear. Now, My friends, it is not enough that we hear these truths with the intellect. It is not enough that we nod in agreement or feel a momentary uplift. Spiritual truth becomes power only as it becomes experience, and experience comes through the simplest of practices, practices so gentle, so brief, so effortless that the human mind almost despises them. But the spirit within knows their value. Let us take a few moments to understand how to step out of the false sinner identity and into the awareness of your true being, not as theory, but as living realization. Several times each day, perhaps many times, if you are willing, pause for just a moment. You do not need a quiet room. You do not need a long meditation. You do not even need to close your eyes, though you may if it helps. All you need is a moment of inner turning, and in that moment, in the privacy of your own consciousness, gently acknowledge, I am not a sinner seeking God. I am God expressing as individual being. Do not try to believe it. Do not try to feel spiritual. Do not attempt to stir emotion or produce holiness. Simply acknowledge, for the truth does not become true when you believe it. It is already true. Your acknowledgement is not an effort to make it so. It is merely the opening of the curtain so that the light may shine through. After this simple recognition, let there be a few seconds, just a few, of quiet inner receptivity. And in the stillness of those few seconds, something begins to happen. You may not feel it immediately, and that is perfectly all right. But the consciousness that once held the belief in separation begins to soften. The old identity begins to lose its grip. The sinner mask begins to fall away. Then, if it arises naturally, you may add one more gentle whisper of truth. Father, thou art here. Thy life is my life. Let that be enough. Not a prayer for protection, not a request for forgiveness, not a plea for improvement, just a recognition of what already is. Then here is the key. Return to your activity as though nothing special has happened. The human mind will want to turn this into a performance, a technique, an achievement. Do not allow it. Let the work be done silently, secretly, without strain. You are not trying to purify yourself. You are not trying to become holy. You are remembering who you are. And as this remembrance is touched again and again throughout the day, something begins to shift. The sense of me, the old identity of weakness, guilt, and separation, loosens its hold. A new center of being emerges, not a new self, but the eternal self finally allowed to be seen. Then, one day, when a feeling of unworthiness tries to arise, you will notice there is a space between you and that feeling. You will see it as a visitor, an echo of the old life, but not as your identity. And in that moment, without effort, you will simply turn inward and feel, this is not I, and it will vanish. When a memory of past wrongdoing appears, and it will, you will no longer sink under its weight. Instead, you will look upon it with compassion and say, this belonged to a dream self that never existed in God, and the sting will be gone. When a temptation appears, when a shadow thought says you are guilty, unworthy, fallen, you will have the quiet courage to answer, I stand as the child of God, untouched by the illusions of the world, and the temptation will dissolve. This, my friends, is how the sinner identity falls away, not by force, not by repression, not by effort, but by the simple, steady recognition of the truth of your being. If you will practice this brief inner turning, 30 seconds, perhaps less, many times a day, you will find that the past breaks off from you like a shell that no longer fits. You will feel the lightness of one who no longer carries a burden that never belonged to them. And slowly, gently, wonderfully, the Christ of your own being will begin to shine through your affairs, through your relationships, through your very presence. For the practice is simple, but the transformation is profound. Now, my friends, having learned how to step out of the false sense of a sinner and into the awareness of your true identity, let us understand something that is both humbling and magnificent. Your spiritual realization is never for you alone. There is no such thing as private illumination, for when one individual awakens to truth, the entire fabric of human consciousness is lifted. This is the mystery of oneness. Just as a single lamp brightens every corner of a room, so the light that dawns in your consciousness touches the lives of those around you. You may never speak a word of truth to them. You may never mention God or Christ or the infinite way, yet your very presence becomes a benediction, a quiet, healing influence that moves silently, invisibly, yet unmistakably into the minds and hearts of others. Joel often said, "You are not a person radiating light. You are the transparency through which the light of God shines." And it is this transparency, this surrender of the personal self, that becomes the instrument of blessing to the world. The moment you stop identifying with the sinner, the struggler, the fearful one, and begin to rest as God's own child, something shifts not only within you, but in the collective consciousness of mankind. You see, the world believes in separation, in guilt, in condemnation, in fear. These beliefs have accumulated over centuries and have built the atmosphere in which humanity lives. But when even one individual steps out of that atmosphere and abides in the recognition of oneness, when you look upon yourself and others as the expression of the same divine life, you weaken the collective belief in separation. You loosen the chains for all. You may think this too grand a claim, but consider how often the presence of one calm person can soothe an entire room, or how the love of one tender heart can soften the hardened spirit of another. That is only the faintest shadow of what happens when an individual begins to live in the awareness, I and the Father are one. You become a point through which the infinite pours itself into human consciousness. You need not try to do anything. You need not try to heal the world. You need not try to teach or persuade or correct. Your only responsibility is to dwell in the truth of your being, and the truth will do the work. When you walk into a home where there is tension, the atmosphere will begin to change, not because you have spoken, but because the peace within you is a living presence. When you meet someone burdened by guilt, they will feel an inexplicable sense of release, not because you absolve them, but because your consciousness no longer believes in the sinner. When you encounter anger, it will soften in your presence, not because you resisted it, but because the Christ in you beholds the Christ in the other. This is the meaning of the scriptural promise. A little leaven leavens the whole lump. One awakened consciousness becomes the leaven that raises the collective loaf of humanity. You may never know the extent of your influence. You may never witness the fruits of your realization. But the moment you cease to condemn yourself, you help release the world from condemnation. The moment you step out of fear, you weaken the world's belief in fear. The moment you rest as the child of God, you make it easier for all to remember their own divine lineage. You see how profound this is? This is the meaning of the scriptural promise. A little leaven leavens the whole lump. One awakened consciousness becomes the leaven that raises the collective loaf of humanity. You may never know the extent of your influence. You may never witness the fruits of your realization. But the moment you cease to condemn yourself, you help release the world from condemnation. The moment you step out of fear, you weaken the world's belief in fear. This is why your realization matters. This is why you cannot dismiss yourself as insignificant. This is why you cannot say, "Who am I to awaken?" For the answer is simple and eternal. You are the one through whom God has chosen to shine today. And as you live in this awareness, the world is lifted, not by your effort, but by your being. And now, my friends, as we draw this hour to its quiet close, let us gather together the threads of what we have seen, not as a summary for the mind, but as a gentle resting place for the heart. We have walked through the illusion of separation. We have looked upon the shadow called sin, and we have seen it dissolve in the light of truth. We have touched, however lightly, the radiant realization that your true identity is not the troubled, striving, fearful self the world trained you to believe in. You are, and always have been, the living expression of God's own being. And so I invite you now not to think, not to analyze, not to measure your spiritual progress, but simply to rest. Rest in the great truth that has been whispering to you throughout this entire journey. You were never the sinner. You were never the fallen. You were never the separate one. You are the beloved of God, the child of the infinite, the transparency through which the light of divine love shines into this world. Let this truth cradle you for a moment. Let it wash gently through your consciousness like a quiet tide at dawn. You do not have to make it true. You do not have to hold on to it with effort or discipline. Truth holds you. Truth sustains you. Truth is the ground upon which your being stands. You may notice, as we sit together in this silence, that the mind tries to return to old habits. It may whisper, "But what about my past? What about my mistakes? What about the things I still need to overcome?" And to this we give the simplest, softest answer: peace, be still. We have touched, however lightly, the radiant realization that your true identity is not the troubled, striving, fearful self the world trained you to believe in. You are, and always have been, the living expression of God's own being. The past is a dream that never touched your true self. Your mistakes were shadows cast upon a screen of belief. There is nothing to overcome, for the Christ in you was never harmed. When you rise from this moment, do not strain to hold the awareness. Do not try to maintain peace by effort. Simply walk gently, quietly, through your day with the inner knowing that the presence goes before you. And as you touch that presence again and again, in little pauses of quiet throughout the day, you will feel the truth deepening in your consciousness, becoming not just something you hear, but something you live. And the world around you, your home, your work, your relationships will begin to respond to this inner shift, not because you are performing truth, but because truth has found a dwelling place in you. My friends, go now in peace. Not your peace, but the peace of God that passeth all understanding. Let that peace keep your heart and mind. Let that peace guide your steps. Let that peace reveal to you, day by day, the wonder of what you truly are. For you were never lost. You were never separate. You were never less than the divine expression of infinite love. Rest in this. Live in this. Be this.